Today's lesson is the hurricane effect. How Amanda Gorman is taking the world by storm. Hello, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And today we're talking about a person by the name of Amanda Gorman, and she is taking the world by storm. In other words, she has become very popular very quickly, and she is known all over the world for what she has done.
Yes, and we have two words related to the weather here. We have hurricane and we have storm, but we're not talking about the weather because these two words are being used figuratively in this context. And they're used to describe Amanda Gorman. Now, Roger, I don't know if you saw the inauguration of U.S. President Joe Biden back in January, on January the 20th on TV, but it was quite an event, and not because of Joe Biden only, but because of Amanda Gorman and the speech that she made, or rather the poem that she read during this inauguration.
Yeah, I did not see the inauguration ceremony in its entirety, but I did see news reports about it, and it seemed like every news report about the inauguration featured Amanda Gorman, so she must have really impressed people by what she did. So that's why we have the hurricane effect. Hey, her popularity has spread by storm as a result of what she did at the inauguration, reading poetry there. So let's find out what this is all about. Let's read the first part of our lesson, and then we'll come back to talk about it.
The hurricane effect. How Amanda Gorman is taking the world by storm. The inauguration of U.S. President Joe Biden didn't just begin a new political period. It also brought to the world's attention the remarkable talent of Amanda Gorman. At age 22, Gorman became the youngest poet ever to speak at a presidential inauguration as she delivered The Hill We Climb, a piece highlighting American unity while also acknowledging dark chapters of the country's past and present.
大家好，标题中我们看到片语 take 加名词 by storm， 表示风靡在大获成功。例如 The director's new movie took critics and audience members by storm. 这名导演的新电影风靡影评与观众。或是 The restaurant took Toronto by storm and soon became the most popular in the city. 该餐厅于多伦多大获成功，迅速成为该市最受欢迎的餐厅。另外，以下补充两个有天气现象在当中的片语。第一 have one's head in the clouds， 表示不切实际或是心不在焉。举例来说 Though he was an intelligent man, Errol often had his head in the clouds. Errol 虽然是个聪明人，但他常不切实际。第二 shoot the breeze. Breeze, B-R-E-E-Z-E. Shoot the breeze 表示闲聊，像是 I can't talk right now, but how about coming over later to shoot the breeze? 我现在没有办法讲话，晚一点再过来聊好吗？接着我们看到单字 presidential， 这个字是形容词，指总统的，与总统有关的，或是总统选举的。例如 Taiwan's presidential office building is located in Taipei. 台湾的总统府位于台北。或是 The senator announced his plans for a presidential campaign. 这位参议员宣布他竞选总统的计划。再来，我们看到动词 acknowledge， 指承认或是认可。像是 Brian acknowledged that he was responsible for the failure of the project. Brian 承认他应对这个企划的失败负责。或是 Jan acknowledged Bonnie's good work by taking her to lunch. Jan 带 Bonnie 去吃午餐，表示认可他工作的杰出表现。另外，除了上面的意思，这个字还有以下两种用法。第一，指致意或是感谢。我们可以说 The introduction acknowledged the many achievements of the keynote speaker. 这段引言向主讲者的许多成就致意。第二是只对打招呼。例如 Passing an old colleague in the street, Sarah acknowledged him with a nod and a smile. Sarah 在街上巧遇老同事，她点头微笑向对方打招呼。
So we're talking about Amanda Gorman and the hurricane effect that she has produced and the fact that she is taking the world by storm. So hurricane here is a violent storm, and it's basically the same thing as a typhoon, except typhoons happen in Asia and hurricanes. The word hurricane is usually used in North America and other parts of the world to describe a violent storm. So the hurricane effect is an effect that's very, very strong and that produces a lot of change, and it could be violent. But we're talking about Amanda Gorman and the fact that she is taking the world by storm, which means that she is doing something very important. She has made a big impression on the world. She is successful and she is making a difference. So, for instance, I could say the actress took the world by storm in her first film, meaning the actress made a big impression on the world in her first film. And here, Amanda Gorman is making a big impression on the world. She is taking the world by storm.
Yep, she has become popular rather quickly, and she's famous, even though she's still quite young. Now, here in the first paragraph, it says, the inauguration of U.S. President Joe Biden didn't just begin a new political period. It also brought to the world's attention the remarkable talent of Amanda Gorman. Now, after a presidential election in the United States, after it takes place in November, and if a new president is elected, then that person takes office in January, and they have an inauguration, which is a ceremony where the president is sworn in. He puts his hand on the Bible and makes a promise that he's going to do a good job and stuff like that. And that's the inauguration. That's the ceremony when we have a new president. I think you have the same thing here in Taiwan. When you elect a new president, you also will have an inauguration ceremony.
Yes, and this inauguration ceremony that celebrated U.S. President Joe Biden's taking office also brought something else to the world's attention. It brought to the world's attention the remarkable talent of Amanda Gorman. Now, to bring to the world's attention means to make the world notice, or you can also say to bring to somebody's attention, to bring to your teacher's attention, your manager's attention. Doesn't have to be the world here. It just means to make somebody notice something. So I could say, no one told me the meeting has been rescheduled. Why was this not brought to my attention? Why did nobody tell me this? So the inauguration of U.S. President Joe Biden brought to the world's attention the remarkable talent of Amanda Gorman.
Yep, it let the world know about her remarkable talent. Now, something's remarkable when it is really, really special. It's a big deal. It's worth noting. It's something that we should know about. So, yes, you might make a remarkable discovery in science, for example, something that other people would know about, and it's really great. It's really fantastic. So, of course, the world got to know about her remarkable talent, her exceptional talent, her wonderful talent.
Yes, at age 22, Gorman became the youngest poet ever to speak at a presidential inauguration as she delivered The Hill We Climb, a piece highlighting American unity while also acknowledging dark chapters of the country's past and present. So Amanda Gorman was the youngest poet to ever speak at a presidential inauguration. So we looked at the word inauguration before, which is the celebration of somebody taking an important office. And here, presidential inauguration just refers to an inauguration of the president of the United States. And during her presence at the presidential inauguration, Gorman delivered a poem. And the name of the poem is The Hill We Climb. And what's special about this poem is that it highlights American unity while also acknowledging dark chapters of the country's past and present.
So, of course, in a lot of countries, especially communist countries, they probably will be unwilling to talk about mistakes that they've made in the past. So in this particular case, she acknowledged, or at least the poem acknowledged, some dark history in the United States, probably talking about slavery or unjustified wars, poverty, and things like that. It acknowledged those dark chapters. A chapter in this particular case just means a period of history, and of course, slavery is probably the darkest chapter of the USA. And yes, that poem acknowledged all those things.
However, she also highlighted American unity. So she wasn't all doom and gloom. She also talked about some positive things about America and the possibility of uniting amongst Americans, because right before Joe Biden took office, America was pretty divided. Doesn't matter which side you're on politically, but nobody could deny that America was quite divided in their views about how the country should be run.
Exactly, and it still is divided as well, but hopefully a poem like this and a poet like Amanda Gorman can help us mend those fences. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson for today. It's time now to move on to the second part, and we'll talk about the life and times of Amanda Gorman.
Gorman began writing at an early age while growing up in Los Angeles, using written language as a way to express herself without being limited by her speech impediment. By the time she was 16, she had already distinguished herself enough to be named Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles, and a year later she published her first poetry collection, The One for Whom Food Is Not Enough. At just 19 years old, Gorman was named America's first National Youth Poet Laureate.
第二部分，我们看到单字 speech impediment， 这个字是名词，意思是语言障碍。举例来说 ，Joseph was diagnosed with a speech impediment at the age of 6. Joseph 6岁时被诊断出患有语言障碍。
So let's look a little bit at Amanda Gorman's background. Who is this amazing young woman? Well, she began writing at an early age while growing up in Los Angeles, using written language as a way to express herself without being limited by her speech impediment. So we learned that she grew up in California and that she was writing from a very early age. And the reason she wrote was not only to express her thoughts and feelings in writing, but also because it was a way for her to get over her speech impediment. She wrote without being limited by her speech impediment. A speech impediment is a difficulty in speaking which can be caused by nervousness or a physical problem or some psychological emotional issue. It's basically difficulty speaking.
Right, and impediment comes from the verb to impede, which means to try to get in your way or slow you down. So most of us take our speech for granted, but people who have speech impediments have difficulty speaking. They may speak with a stutter. There are various different speech impediments out there. I think Joe Biden himself suffered for many years from a stammer or stuttering, as we call it. And so, yes, she had a speech impediment, but she was still able to express herself using written language. And by the time she was 16 years old, she had already distinguished herself enough to be named Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. And a year later, she published her first poetry collection, The One for Whom Food Is Not Enough. Okay, so she distinguished herself enough in the field of poetry that she was able to get this award here of being named the Youth Poet Laureate. Now, distinguish here means that you stand out. You're able to be better at something than other people are. So, yes, we have lots of young poets, but she was actually one that a lot of people noticed.
Yes, and if you distinguish yourself, it means that you do something so well that people take notice of you and they respect you for it. So Amanda Gorman distinguished herself through her poetry, through her writing, and she was able to do these things so well. She was such a good writer that she was even named Youth Poet Laureate of Los Angeles. And a poet laureate is basically, it's a poet that represents a particular place that has, it's the highest achievement, really, official achievement that you can make as a poet when you're chosen as the official poet of a city or a country. And Amanda Gorman did get that distinction.
Yeah, a laureate here means that you've been recognized for some kind of achievement, like a Nobel laureate, for example. Laureate, of course, comes from the word laurel, which is kind of like a little wreath or something that is placed on your head, at least it was maybe in Roman times, to note that you had achieved something spectacular. So yeah, if you're a youth poet laureate, hey, that's some kind of award for being a great poet as a young person. And then she published her first collection of poetry entitled The One for Whom Food Is Not Enough. And at just 19 years old, Gorman was named America's first National Youth Poet Laureate. So that's quite an achievement for somebody who's only 19 years old. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's now move on to the third part.
Though Gorman has extensive speaking and writing experience, with multiple poetry readings on CBS This Morning and articles in the New York Times and the Huffington Post, her performance at Biden's inauguration rocketed her to even greater prominence. Of her 3 books coming out in 2021, 2 made bestseller lists following the event, and the writer has greater ambitions for the future.
第三部分我们看到名词 prominence 指显著、出名，像是 No one believed the rumors because of his prominence in the community. 因他在社区里的声望，没人相信那个谣言。另外补充一个相关片语 shoot to prominence 指窜红或是声名大噪。我们可以说 The soccer player shot to prominence after he scored in the World Cup final. 这位足球员在世界杯决赛中得分后声名大噪。最后我们看到单字 bestseller 这个字是名词，指畅销书或是畅销商品。例如 Lisa hopes the book she wrote will someday become a bestseller. Lisa 希望她写的书将来有一日能够成为畅销书。
So, though Gorman has extensive speaking and writing experience with multiple poetry readings on CBS This Morning and articles in the New York Times and the Huffington Post, her performance at Biden's inauguration rocketed her to even greater prominence. So, we learned here that before her performance at Biden's inauguration, she had already achieved a lot. She had extensive speaking and writing experience. Extensive here means in large amount or degree. So, she has spoken many times in public and has written many pieces, especially poetry, which she read on CBS This Morning is a television program. It's a kind of news program on television that happens every morning, and articles in the New York Times and Huffington Post. These are both national U.S. newspapers that are very famous.
Right, so she's had pretty broad speaking experience, pretty extensive. She has spoken in a lot of different places. And also, we're saying that her performance at Biden's inauguration rocketed her to even greater prominence. So here we've got the word rocket being used as a verb. If you want to put a satellite into space or if you want to send people to the moon, then you use a rocket. But here rocket is being used as a verb. That just means someone or something has risen quite quickly, usually in fame or in terms of being well known.
Yes, and rocket here used as a verb is often accompanied by the word fame. As Roger mentioned, you can say rocket to fame or rocket to success. These are very common phrases. So here, Gorman rocketed to even greater prominence after her performance at the inauguration. Here, the word prominence means the state of being important or well-known. Prominence is a little bit like fame. It's a combination of fame and success. So after the inauguration, she achieved even more prominence than she had before.
Yep, she achieved great prominence in the field of poetry. And of her 3 books coming out in 2021, which is right now, 2 made bestseller lists following the event. So, of course, when we talk about books being published, in order to determine how popular those books are, we have various publications and organizations who make these bestseller lists, okay? The most famous one in the United States is the New York Times list of bestsellers. So they will list the books that have sold the most. And yeah, if you like reading, but you're not sure what you want to read, you could look at a list of the bestsellers and pick something out.
That's right. So she made 2 bestseller lists, which means that she will also be making quite a bit of money with the sales of these books that she has written. And this was all due to the event, her participation at Biden's inauguration.
Right. So if it weren't for that inauguration, she would not have rocketed to fame as she's experiencing now. So lucky for us, we get to know about her and we get to read some of her poetry as well. Yeah, I'd like to go online and check that out. When I listen to poetry or when I, appreciate poetry, I like to hear it read out loud as opposed to just read silently on the page. I think poetry should be read aloud, don't you, Helen?
Oh, yes. I think poetry was originally written to be read aloud. It was only later with the invention of printing that poetry was distributed to the masses and people started reading poetry instead of listening to it. But if no one had the chance to listen to Amanda Gorman's performance at the inauguration, I'm sure you can find it easily on YouTube or on the internet somewhere. And it's very inspiring. That's all I can say about it. And it deserves to be heard.
I'm going to check it out for sure. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. Let's now listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第2部分有一个句子写到 Amanda Gorman 到了16岁时，她早已出类拔萃而获选为洛杉矶的青年桂冠诗人。文中用到 By the time she was 16, she had already 怎么样怎么样。好，那这边我们就来学习 by the time 的用法。By the time 是用来引导时间副词子句去表达到什么什么的时候，到什么什么时间之前。那么 by the time 主词加动词呢，这部分可以摆在主要子句之前或是之后，用来描述说在那个时间点之前的状态或者是已经发生的事。那这可以是指过去或是未来的情况哦。我们先来看指过去情况的话， by the time 之后是接过去式，那么主要子句呢可以用过去简单式或者是过去完成式 had 加 pp 来强调动作已经发生或是完成。像我们课文里面他说 by the time she was 16， 这边就是用过去简单式，然后 she had already 怎么样怎么样，这时候他就是用过去完成式来强调已经完成，已经达到这件事情了。我们来造2个例句。 By the time we got there, there were no more seats left. 我们到的时候已经没有空位了。好，那这时候呢，我们主要子句就是用过去简单式表达。 By the time we got there, the show had already begun. 我们到的时候，表演已经开始了。那这时候主要子句就是用过去完成式表达了。接着来看未来情况， by the time 之后呢，记得是接现在式，而主要子句呢可以用未来式或者是未来完成式。未来完成式就是 will have 加上 pp。 好，一样来看2个例句哦。 By the time he finishes work, we will be at the restaurant. 他工作结束时，我们会在餐厅。注意看到 by the time 那个子句呢，它是用现在式。好，那么这个主要子句它只是用未来式。 By the time you come back, I will have finished my homework. 你回来的时候呢，我就已经写完回家作业了。好，那注意 by the time 这边一样，我们就是用现在式，然后呢，主要子句的话就是用未来完成式。好，课文第3部分提到说Her performance at Biden's inauguration rocketed her to even greater prominence. 她在拜登就职典礼上的表现更是让她声名大噪。好，句子里面这个 rocket 是当动词用哦，它用来表达快速上升、移动，就带有这种快速窜起啊、迅速成功的语义。那么 rocket somebody to prominence 就是表达让某人一举成名、声名大噪。好，另外一个常见的用法是 rocket to fame， 意思就相当于 shoot to fame。好，那么 fame 就是指名声、声望。那我们可以用某人或某事物 shoot to fame 或是 rocket to fame， 也可以用 shoot 或是 rocket 加上某人或某事物 to fame 来表达。举例来说 The singer rocketed to fame after her album sold 1,000,000 copies。 那位歌手的专辑卖出100万张之后，他就快速窜红了。那还有一个用法要介绍，就是 rise to fame， 它也可以表达成名出名的意思。例如 The actor got the lead role in the movie and rose to instant fame。 那名演员他在电影当中饰演主角，一戏成名。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天的单字吧。
Hurricane. The hurricane caused millions of dollars of damage to the towns on the coast. Inauguration. Bob's family gathered together to watch the president's inauguration on TV. Remarkable. Stephen made a remarkable recovery after breaking his leg snowboarding. Presidential. To please his supporters, the presidential candidate promised to lower taxes. Acknowledge. In an email to his brother, Nigel acknowledged that he had been selfish and needed to change. Distinguish. Her ability to think critically distinguishes her from the other students in the class. Extensive. A violent storm passed through this area last night, causing extensive damage.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.